Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The date had been awful. Their friends looked like they had fun, though. A quadruple date on a day as special as Valentine's wasn't anybody's idea of romance at first, but David, being the talented salesperson he was, made quite convincing points on why it would be amazing. He himself didn't believe a word he said, but needed the break in his routine desperately enough to persuade. He needed an escape from his love life, an escape through other people. David and Devin didn't share a word with each other the entire ride back home. David unlocked the apartment door with inexplicable urgency. If he would have shoved the apartment door with the force of 4 fingers instead of 3, he would have hit her straight in the face. He found himself wondering how she would react to being hit in the nose. Would she point it out, or would she just pretend it never happened, like she usually did with things she hadn't been programmed for? David grabbed a towel and the bottle of Maker's Mark 46 he kept hidden in the bookcase. It was a bottle meant for dark days, and judging by the date he had just been on, his day couldn't get any darker. The pale brunette looked straight ahead and waited by the door for the master to give her a purpose. Go to the kitchen and make me tea. After that, go to bed. Do you want me to bring your tea in the bathroom? David gave her an annoyed look. She didn't catch that. Being a second-generation model, she wasn't as sensitive to human emotions as the newer models were. No, leave it on the kitchen table. Devin was a functioning humanoid robot, commonly known as a CuddL. CuddLs had become an essential part of society. They could apply for jobs, make friends, and be entrusted with different tasks, whilst always keeping in mind that the sole purpose of their existence was to love and cater to their partner's every need. David had had Devin for 9 years. He had been amongst the first to ever purchase a CuddL, and now, not even a decade later, almost everybody had one. The people who didn't have a CuddL either couldn't afford one, couldn't purchase one due to their criminal record, or had been happily married since before the CuddL even came on the market. David cursed the day his childhood nostalgia made him order the Christina Ricci look-alike instead of an Anna Nicole. Devin was petite and looked somewhat intimidating, yet was anything but that. She knew how to cook, clean, sew, and answer in short and concise sentences. She would rarely speak unless spoken to. Reading and writing would have cost David extra, so he went without. Eventually, after 2 years, David got fed up with Devin's simplicity, so he ordered a customized Alexa chip for her, which he made react to the name of Devin. Devin couldn't play music like an Alexa could, but she turned into a very good weather forecaster and knew the outcome of every soccer match. David hated soccer. The Alexa chip hadn't been a bargain at all. It had cost more than the reading and writing option he passed on the day he ordered her. He'd been so stupid. Devin was, by far, the most expensive thing he owned. Yet he reached a point where he saw more value in his bath salts than he did in his CuddL. David used to like submissive women back when he was chubby, ugly, and made fun of every day of his life. After he started going to the gym on a regular basis, got promoted at work, and purchased a car most passers-by whistled after, his taste in women changed. He started preferring fit over skinny, or curvy. Either was fine. He preferred tanned over pale skin and sass over shyness. He developed a liking for women who dolled themselves up from head to toe, liked to take charge, knew what they wanted and were not afraid to ask for it. He preferred women. Devon slipped into his thoughts. Yeah, as long as they were the complete opposite of Devon, he preferred those women. As it was to be expected, Xavier and Nate showed up with their respective cuddles to the date. Xavier had his partner for 5 years now. Julian, a cuddle 6th generation who, if not for the charging port on his left hip, would pass for human any day of the week. Nate, on the other hand, changed his cuddle every 2 or 3 months. He didn't purchase his cuddle for life like Xavier and David did, but was paying a monthly subscription for a cuddle service who lets you change your partner as often as you desired, for a small extra fee, of course. The only downside was that you couldn't customize them. You could only choose them from a catalog, like from a menu. Nate's current one was called Krista. She had 3 other owners before Nate. At first, the very idea of a cuddle for rent made David feel sick. But the more Devon's presence planted its roots and weeds into his life, the more he felt like Nate found the gateway to paradise. Vicky had surprised everyone tonight. She introduced her friends to her new boyfriend, Bill, and to everybody's shock, Bill was not what they expected. He was human. He was a human being dating another human being. It wasn't unheard of, but it had become a very rare phenomenon. "We met in the parking lot of Martin Luther Street," Bill explained. "She put a dent in my bumper, if you know what I mean." Laughter erupted all around the table, save for David, who was too stunned, and Devon, who wasn't wired for subtlety. Vicky punched Bill in the shoulder, although it was obvious that she enjoyed the joke more than everybody else combined. "No, for real though, she really did hit my car. I made her have lunch with me to make it up to me." "Wow," Nate shook his head. "I mean, don't get me wrong, I think you totally vibe with each other, but a person our age must be mad to date another human nowadays." The group agreed with that sentiment, kicking it up a notch with synonyms for the word mad. "So, how does this even work?" David asked the human couple as soon as he snapped out of his astonishment. Who decides what to eat? Who does the wash-up? Who decides which TV programs to watch?" "Well, we both do." Bill stretched his arm over the top rail of Vicky's chair, and she took that as an invitation to lean into him. "Yeah, we take turns." "Isn't it weird, though?" Xavier wanted to know. Before the 2000s, yeah, people would have frowned at couples like us." He gestured to Julian and himself. "Know what I mean? After that, they frowned at people dating cuddles, and now we're here, jaws on the floor because a human found another human to love. What?" He verbalized what everybody was thinking. A human dating another human was unheard of in a world where you could design and customize your dream partner. Humans were too unpredictable, too capricious and moody, too absorbed with themselves. They could damage their significant other's day-to-day life through personal routines and habits which wouldn't match their partners at all. How could one find perfection in another person? Do you guys, hear each other when you go to the bathroom? Julian always asked the most inappropriate questions, and Xavier adored him for it. Every human at the table erupted in contagious laughter, earning themselves amused glances from the other couples in the restaurant. "Babe, you can't ask that." "Oh, come on. Seriously though, do you? Because, I have no idea what the big fuss is about since I can't smell anything, but Mr. Over Here always makes a big deal out of it." Bill and Vicky exchanged a quick glance. "Don't you dare," she warned. A mischievous grin spread across Bill's face as he turned to look at the rest of the group. "She farted in her sleep 2 nights ago." Vicky buried her face in her hands whilst the rest of the table roared with laughter. David laughed along, but could feel the now familiar bitterness of jealousy boil within himself. Dating another human being. The idea seemed nice. Dating another cuddle? The idea seemed even nicer. Dating another anything. The idea might have given him an erection if Devin wasn't sitting right beside him. Cuddles were registered property. The new constitutional annex dictated that no human was allowed to date more than one cuddle at a time, which meant that unless you found a single person willing to take your cuddle off your hands, or you happened to have a subscription plan like Nate, you were stuck with your cuddle forever. The same thing applied in the case of a cuddle's well-being. If something were to happen to it, the current partner was to take full responsibility. Cuddles were also completely off the table for people with any type of history related to violence. It was then that Vicky decided to change the subject. Did you guys hear some jeweler in Russia tried to open up his cuddle? Everybody went quiet. Xavier took a deep inhale, and just as he was about to tell Vicky that her choice of subject was out of line, his cuddle interfered. That's not possible. Julian grinned. I know, but he tried anyway. How? Nate's cuddle, Krista, wanted to know. She spoke in the voice bubblegum would have if it could talk. He's a jeweler. Vicky shrugged. I guess he had one of those diamond saws lying around and wanted to see what's up. Pfft, idiot. Julian continued. Our skin is made of WBN membrane. This stuff puts Kevlar to shame any day of the week. Xavier laughed. That's a bad comparison. Kevlar is super outdated. Haven't they, made better bulletproof materials since? Not really. They just added some chemical compound found in diamonds to the old thing. But I don't think it's as tough as Cuddle skin. Not after the 4th generation ones, at least. David forced himself to stop thinking about the date. It was making him angry. Everything made him angry lately, especially seeing how happy everyone around him was. He tried emptying his mind in an attempt to enjoy the lingering warmth of the bathwater. It didn't work. David took another swig of whiskey. He started to look like a fig, so even though he didn't exactly feel like it, he had no choice but to get out of the tub. As he brushed his teeth, the thought of getting into his tracksuit and going out for a jog was a lot more appealing than slipping into bed next to Devin. So what if it was 10 p.m. at night, in the middle of February? So what if he just bathed? So what if he was drunk and his girlfriend was waiting for him to come to bed? David spat toothpaste foam in the sink with all the hate in the world. He brought the half-empty whiskey bottle back to the bedroom with him. To his surprise, Devin was waiting for him in the doorframe. What are you doing? I thought I told you to go to bed. You're upset. David thought he must look like he'd tear the entire apartment down if even his dunce of a cuddle could tell that he's upset. Yes, move. Devin moved out of the way, obedient as ever. David, on the other hand, didn't. He just stood there, watching her with disgust and pity. Why don't you ever nag? Devin looked at him with slightly raised eyebrows. It was as close to a look of confusion as David would ever get. Girlfriends nag. It's what they do. Why do you drink on a weeknight? Why do you wear this? Why do you do that? Why don't you ever nag? David saw a multicolored light draw loops around both of Devin's irises. She was Googling the definition for nag through her Alexa chip. Devin, stop. The lights were gone, and David groaned in frustration. I'm going out for a jog. Okay. David's fist clenched around the bottleneck. I'm going out for a jog on the night of Valentine's Day instead of spending it with you. And all you have to say is, okay? I want you to be happy. Then make me happy. Devin didn't even budge. It's not that she had gotten used to him screaming at her. She didn't budge the first time either. Do you want me to reheat the tea? No. You want something to eat? I already ate, dumbass. Do you want to have sex? David didn't want to go out for a jog. He wanted to run. Run far, far away from this apartment and his life with this poor imitation of a woman. Or we can watch Family Guy. That show always makes you happy. No, Devin, It doesn't make me happy, it just makes me laugh. David approached his cuddle and lowered his face to the same level as hers. You're upset, she tried again. You pointed that out already. You're like a fucking broken record. What are you going to ask me next? Tea? Food? Sex? Gah. Devin's eyebrows were slightly raised again. Family Guy? David screamed. He screamed for almost half a minute, straight into the cuddle's face. He screamed until tears started rolling down his face. You're upset. I want to help. David was shaking so hard. The whiskey in his hand was plopping in the confinements of the bottle. You want to help, you sack of metals? Then be somebody else. Be anything else. Disappear from my life or be literally anybody else. I just want you to be happy. And you think I don't? That's what you're here for. You're here to make me happy. Like Julian makes Xavier happy, like Krista makes Nate happy, like Bill makes Vicky happy. Devin has to make David happy. That's Devin's sole purpose. Make me happy. Devin was silent for a second. Then she opened her mouth and closed it again, and David saw multicolored light do another lap around her irises. Happy, adjective, 1, feeling or showing pleasure, or David snapped. He swung the whiskey bottle at Devin's head so hard, not only did the bottle shatter, but her whole body flew and crashed into the opposite wall. She fell on the floor in a heap of hair and limbs, and seeing her like that made David snap out of his rage. Devin moved slightly. Oh God, Devin, baby, I'm so sorry. It's fine. I'm okay. David crouched next to her, albeit in no particular hurry. It was redundant to ask her if she's hurt. Cuddles couldn't feel pain. David helped his girl sit up, and that's when he saw it. He was looking at it intently, trying to see if that flicker of blue was really there or just a figment of his imagination. Nate's words echoed in his mind from somewhere far away, like he had heard them not earlier that night, but sometime between years ago and another life. I don't think it's as tough as Cuddle's skin. Not after the 4th generation ones, at least. A gash. There was a gash in Devin's jaw. There was a 3-inch gash in the jaw of his 2nd generation Cuddle, and for the first time in years, David felt something very close to love for his girlfriend. Oh, Dev. The idea had been planted, and it was growing rapidly. It grew roots, leaves, and branches, spreading everywhere, leaving no lucid thought uninfected. David took his partner's face in his hands. She smiled. Do you love me? I do. He kissed her then, for the first time in months. She threw her arms around his neck, trying to deepen the kiss, but always letting him be the one in control. How much do you love me? There is nothing and nobody I love more than you. Of course there wasn't. Good. David reached behind himself and took one of the biggest shards he could find splattered on the carpet. He should have thought about doing this years ago. Devin looked at the shard, but said nothing. If you really love me, you're going to stay still and be quiet until I'm done. Understand? Devin raised her big brown eyes at him. If David didn't know any better, he would have said that she was about to cry. Will this make you happy? David wanted to jump out of his skin. He was so giddy. Yes, this is the one thing that will make me very happy. That was all she needed to know. Devin leaned against the wall, let her hands drop to her sides and head low on her left shoulder. Robot or not, she didn't want to see what David was about to do to her. David situated himself between her legs and started working through the fabric of her blouse and undershirt. He could have gotten the big scissors or a knife, sure, but he was too impatient to see it done. Devon's chest lay bare beneath his fingers before he even knew it. She didn't budge. Hell, she didn't even blink when David sunk the shard of glass in the soft space between her clavicles, hard enough to slit. It was messy. The skin was no WBN membrane, but it was tough stuff nonetheless. Devon didn't look as David barbered her thoracic cavity open. David would have taken dozens of pictures if the action he was performing wasn't highly illegal. Devon's insides were a modern-day miracle. It was all epic braids of wires, cogs, gears, metal plaques, clamps, and tension discs. There was also a gooey substance that imitated cookie dough, but had the same color and smell of motor oil. David didn't feel like disassembling everything. He didn't know how CuddLs worked and if that self-defense system they had was myth or reality. David simply knew that in case of extreme emergency, like this one, a CuddL could send an SOS to its national base and ask for help. But Devon wouldn't do that. He knew it. As long as this is what made him happy, she was willing to go along with it. It made David almost like her again. Almost. David looked around. He wasn't very savvy with electronics, but his general smarts were supposed to pinpoint a certain wire, a certain motor that connected everything to everything else and which, through removal, would result in a complete system shutdown. Both of them were silent. David had nothing left to say to her, and Devon, even though she was an android, knew all too well that her end was near. He'll shut her off and hide her somewhere beneath the floorboards of his cellar. Friends will ask questions, and the day he'll be found out will probably come along too, but he'll deal with that when the time is due. Right now, he has a CuddL to kill. Something was off. David could have missed it, but the more he stared into Devon's open chest, the clearer it became. The wires were moving rhythmically. David thought it was probably just the electric energy that was still running through her, but as he looked closer, he realized that's not it. Behind the wires, crisscrossing in the middle of her chest, was something that looked like a plastic bag. With probably useless care, David moved the wires to the side for a better look. That's when Devon winced slightly, and David understood why. Oh my fucking God. In the middle of her chest, sealed to protect it from the rest of the device, was a beating heart. A beating human heart. That heart was the core of the entire finite network that was Devon. It was what closed the circuit system. The heart was perforated in 3 places by hoses, and there was no doubt in David's mind that one of those was somehow connected to the AC power cord attached to Devon's back. It was an extraordinary piece of work. He should have known that there had to be something human about these machines, but fascinated as he was, it was nowhere near enough to deter him from his goal. It was all too simple. He knew what needed to be done to get it over with. David let the shard drop next to Devon's leg and reached behind himself in search of the bottleneck. It was perfect. One powerful stroke with the broken side, and it would be all over. He welcomed the loneliness that was to come. He welcomed the sweet high that was to be freedom. What the? He wouldn't have even seen it if he impaled her heart straight away. There was something attached to the heart, piercing through the transparent film somewhere at the base of one of the hoses. David leaned in for a closer look. It was tiny and difficult to read, but David recognized what it was. It was a switch. The side it was switched to said Devon in cheap letter stickers. The other side had a tiny piece of metal with 1056.B engraved on it. David had the bottleneck set in position. His left hand was encircled around it, and the palm of his right hand was resting against the mouth. just waiting to hammer the glass into the kernel of Devon's existence. Suddenly, the idea that had planted itself in David's head stopped its expansion and shrunk just enough to let other tiny ideas slip through. There was a switch within Devon. Devon, as he knew her, had been activated by the flip of a switch. And that's when it occurred to David that everything he hated about Devon, everything he had come to deeply and truly loathe about his partner, were the exact same features he had chosen for her. He had to wonder, was this a saving grace? The other side of the switch was neither bare nor did it say off, but was rather a carefully crafted piece of metal which, compared to Devon's poorly attached letters, bore the promise of a new personality, new temper, new anything. Was this a second chance for them? Could he actually wipe away the pre-settings he had once believed in? If he could just reset her, start fresh, could he learn to love her and live with it? He said so himself before. He'd be happy if Devon would either disappear or become anybody else. That did it. David flipped the switch. Ouch! The small electric discharge pinched David's thumb. Devon's heart picked up the pace, and her hands began to twitch. Then came the plethora of various micro-expressions, expressions that had been nothing short of foreign to her face for the past 9 years. David was ecstatic. Devon? Honey, can you hear me? Devon turned her head to look at David. She seemed out of it, like she had just woken up from a drunken slumber, not having yet slept off the alcohol in her system. Her head fell forward, and she began to study her hands like they were the most amazing things she had ever laid eyes on. Can you hear me, Devon? Devon huffed. She touched her face. She let out a chuckle and raised her head to look at David again. She began to laugh while still touching her face, and the sound was so liberating. David laughed along with her. They laughed like idiots for a minute or more. Yes, I can hear you. The shard of glass David had opened Devon's chest with was then lodged into his neck with so much force it made a clean cut through his right carotid artery. David went wide-eyed and opened his mouth to say something, but all that came out was blood and gurgles. Devon watched David suffer as he bled to death on the carpet, and as soon as she knew for certain that he was dead, she began searching the house for a sewing kit to stitch herself back together. David was right. By flipping the switch, Devon had become somebody else entirely. She had become a death row inmate with the number 1056.B, who, according to public records, had been killed no less than 20 years prior. He liked the name Devon, though. It went well with his new carcass, so he guessed he could keep it, along with the pronouns. It would make things easier in the long run. After patching herself up, getting dressed, and packing her bags, Devon grabbed David's car keys and gave him one last look before leaving their home of 9 years forever. This felt right. She connected to her original heart without the settings or constrictions, and even though she was looking at a bled-out corpse on the floor, she felt nothing but happiness. The heroine had been asleep for 2 decades, to be awakened by a charming prince on Valentine's Day. Devon chuckled. If this wasn't romance, she didn't know what was.
Being a programmer, one of my dreams has always been to create an original video game, something that nobody in the industry has done before. After seeing Spore, I became intrigued. Here was an attempt at putting people in control over a universe. After looking at what made video games popular, I realized the main aspect was control. People in their daily lives have no control over their environment. They are told what to do, where to go, and how to live. Their jobs consist of standing or sitting somewhere until it's 5 p.m. and they're allowed to head back home. It's no wonder they're unhappy. For many people, video games are an escape to a world where they are in control or live exciting alternate lives filled with adventure. The aspect of control is generally found in strategy games and the adventure in role-playing games. I looked at games like The Sims and noticed what made them so popular is not just the illusion of control, but the degree of control. In that game, the players have complete control over people's lives. Before The Sims, there was Sim Earth, a game in which you do not control individual people, but an entire Earth. I came to the conclusion that I had to develop a game similar to Spore, in which the player subtly guides evolution. What caused Spore to be such a failure is the lack of realistic control people had. It hardly resembled evolution. To do this, I began by generating a physics system. I know little about physics, but decided to study it and try to create a simplified version in which certain particles can interact in specific manners. When it comes down to it, physics is simply complex mathematics. I simulated energy and matter and created a simple system with a sun emitting energy circled by a planet catching said energy. I decided to create simple basic cells from scratch that were hard-coded, so to speak, in the system I was designing. They lived off of the energy emitted by the sun and had a genetic code that coded for the substances produced by the cells. I guess you could call them my eukaryotes. My world, within a few minutes, would always fill with these cells, after which they would mutate, and the most efficient cell in converting energy from the sun into useful substances for division would survive. It was very boring, but it worked, I guess. I decided to expand the physics system and force the cells to create waste products that were toxic and would kill them. I noticed some cells responded to this by producing less waste. Others responded by producing something to emit the waste. Yet others developed chemicals to clean up the waste products. However, I noticed something fascinating. Running the simulation for a few centuries, a few minutes in real life, created cells that made massive amounts of specific waste products on purpose. I noticed that other cells died as a result of this, to which the other cells responded by usurping the building blocks they had created from energy. The first predators were born. With the first predators, diversity in this little world rapidly increased. Some grew a response to flee when they encountered these toxins. Others grew resistance to them. The ones that grew resistance would eventually grow to utilize the toxin's products. Eventually, I noticed something interesting. The cells that escaped from the toxin grouped up with the cells that utilized the toxins. They stayed close together and helped each other out. Eventually, these types of cells would attach to one another. They formed a weird symbiosis, where the cell that would normally flee would now move toward places where the toxins are, and the other cell would consume the toxins and provide the mover with some of the energy. Without going into too much detail, I became very excited and decided to let the simulation run during the morning. I had stayed up until 5 a.m. while I went to bed. When I woke up at around 11, I noticed the world I had created had changed and was barely recognizable. Massive plant-like structures grew in this world, consumed by other organisms that ate these plants. However, looking at the log, I noticed the world hadn't changed much in the past 2 hours or so. I had reached another stasis point, where the simplicity of my simulation prevented more complex life from evolving. I expanded the system by breaking up energy into different types, with different wavelengths that were absorbed to different degrees by different molecules. I implemented vibrations in the air, created an improved simulation of weight, and made some more minor tweaks. This caused the simulation to run slower, of course, but it was worth the sacrifice. I stayed around the whole day watching the simulation in excitement and playing with it, as it was incredibly addicting. Complex organisms evolved that cooperated. Plants that depended on each other or attracted predators that ate the horrible-looking creatures that ate from them. I had fun and noticed that some creatures evolved warning calls. This means that if they noticed a predator, they would issue a sound, and all others of their kind would flee into holes they had dug in the earth. Others evolved mating calls. I decided to have some fun. I made a dump tool, allowing me to dump specific organisms on the earth, and wrote my name with it. I created 10 meteorites and dumped them on a piece of land to create an island because I wanted to see whether the animals stuck on both sides would evolve in different directions. I made a smiley island with volcanic eruptions. By that time, I realized I had stayed up until 5 a.m. again as I heard the birds outside. I felt tired again, and I woke up at about 1 p.m. or so. When I looked at my simulation again, I felt a sense of shock. Different groups of animals of one species had made statues with stones, some in the form of a smiley, some in the form of my name. I didn't know why they were doing this or how. What I did notice is that they would attack each other from time to time. I didn't know what to do with it, but I concluded that these organisms must have somehow noticed that the smiley and the name I had written were special. The fighting disturbed me, and so I decided to create a massive mountain ridge through volcanic eruptions to separate the two groups. By this time, changes were happening fast compared to earlier. While I had to spend a night sleeping to see tribes evolve in my simulation while I was getting something to eat or take a bathroom break, I would notice the tribesmen wearing different styles of clothing or having changed their type of dwelling. Their numbers were also continually increasing. At some point, I noticed the creatures began making their own symbols on the ground and no longer just copying mine. Most of the symbols seemed random and unintelligible to me, but one stood out. The organisms had created a symbol that resembled them. A small circle with a square beneath it. Within the square, a dot could be found in the center. This was meant to symbolize the visual organs of the creature, as the creature had two visual organs, one in the front of its body and one in the back. In the square, other sensory and reproductive organs were symbolized. Next to the circle on top of the square could be seen something resembling a drawing of a fork. Two of these forks had been painted in opposite directions, and next to that smiley face could be seen. I realized something. They were not communicating towards each other. They were trying to communicate to something out there. My meddling in their landscape had somehow made them realize that something powerful was out there, capable of changing their world. I wondered whether symbols like Stonehenge and the pyramids in my own world could be signs of primitive people trying to do the same thing, begging their creator or overseer to initiate contact with them. However, one thing was undeniable by now. These creatures realized there's something out there. I wondered long, did I have a responsibility to initiate contact with something that isn't real? Or are these creatures real in a different way? Can something be real merely by being capable of having a concept of itself? And even if they are real, does that mean they'll be better off with me initiating contact with them? Should I change my simulation to ensure them permanent happiness? And is it even possible for me to do such a thing? I did not want to confirm my existence to them, but I did want to be able to communicate with them. I decided to program a prophet, an organism that looks like them and cannot be proven by them to be different from themselves, and is fully controlled by me. I let it be born into a powerful position as the son of a leader. I decided to lead by example and seek to teach these creatures English so I could communicate with them. As prophet, I instructed them that English was the language we would use to communicate with the Greater One. They would have no way to be sure if it was true or not. I hadn't made up my mind yet about whether I would reveal myself or not, but I did want to be capable of understanding what they wanted to tell me. In a few generations, they all spoke English, and rapidly signs began emerging on the ground in English. Guide us. Show your greatness. Help us. And during times of disease or hunger or general misery, give us food. Show us a miracle. End our suffering. I decided that I couldn't maintain a world with such suffering as emerged in the simulation without intervening. Why would I accept a world with death and rape and murder if I could make one without it? I implemented fixes that were gradual so they could not be proven to be miraculous. Murder and rape would over the years become rarer, and so would death at a young age. I figured that they would not notice if the change happened over generations, but they did. Thank you. All blessings be upon the greatest. We love you. And, most heartbreaking, come back to us. Tears ran over my face. There is something there, and it knows I am here, able to contact them, but unwilling to do so out of fear of what I've created. But I also felt I had a responsibility. And so I loaded up the character I had created again and went to their king, asking to talk to all their wisest men. But by this time I was not believed. You are number 1341, claiming to be an avatar of the greatest one. If you are him, I pray for your forgiveness, but please show us a sign before demanding of me to gather all our wisest men. And so I hesitated, but responded. Tomorrow there shall be 2 more meteors falling on a deserted island in the sea before you on the same day. And when they do, doubt no more and realize that I have come back to repair the broken world that I have created. And so I exited my avatar and progressed the simulation until the next day was reached, and threw 2 meteors on the deserted island before the mainland, where thousands had gathered to watch whether a sign would be given. Upon the descent of the meteors, celebrations were held. All the sentient organisms gathered around the small house where I had exited my avatar and lay flat on the ground in apparent worship of the man who was last seen there and afraid of coming close. I don't know who was more afraid by now, me or them. I loaded into my avatar again and exited the house. The creatures continued to lay flat on the ground in utter silence. It is as if they felt unworthy of speaking. Let your wisest man stand up, I told them. And up stood one of these bizarre-looking creatures. Thank you for coming back. Pray tell us, do you have any requests of us? I hesitated before saying, there is nothing you can do for me that pleases me, but for you to be good to one another, and to contact me with your wishes and fears. The creature responded, we know you come from a different world, and we are afraid. We understand how vulnerable we are and how incomplete our experience is. Please, allow us to join you in the world that you created our world from. I began crying behind my computer as I responded, I do not know how. The creature responded, at risk of offending you, please understand the severity of our situation. By living in a world that is incomplete, we are at constant risk of disappearing forever, never to be seen again. we would never even consciously realize that our end had come. I realized that they were unable to comprehend that I only had absolute power within their own world and not outside of it. They also did not realize that my knowledge of their world was limited. I may have created it through simple laws, but those simple laws gave way to a reality of its own that is more complex than I can comprehend. I responded again. I only have power in your world. In my world, I have no power, and so I cannot bring you there because my world is not under my control. I also do not understand the world I have created. I do not know what is best for you. Only you do, and you have to inform me what you want. And the man waited for a moment. I was about to think they were going to end communicating with me before their wisest man responded. You have created a world that is incomplete, with creatures that cannot escape it, and you have no power to save them. They are completely unfree and they have no power. We are completely at your mercy, and so we ask you from the deepest of our heart, end us. By now I was crying as I was confused and asked to do the impossible. My own child was asking me to kill it. This is when I noticed the lights in my room flickering before my computer suddenly shut down. I screamed. Upon trying to turn on my computer again, I noticed it wasn't working. I called the power company, who told me that due to an accident, a power surge had traveled through the grid. They promised me they would pay me for any damage done. I hung up and contemplated. The coincidence of what had just happened was too great to be imaginable, and I wondered, if these creatures were at the mercy of a confused creator, could the same be said of me? And if so, did my creator just prevent me from repeating his own mistake?
While playing around with WhatsApp, I stumbled across a weird chat history between two people I don't know. It scared the hell out of me. When I tried to find it again, the app crashed and kept crashing. Luckily, I managed to make a copy. Here it is.
You asleep?
No, guess you're not either.
Can't. It's the wind. Sounds like cats fighting. What's your excuse?
Studying.
So that's what they call porn now?
Annie, what the fuck?
Not denying it.
I still can't believe what Johnny did today.
Me neither. That boy has issues. What the fuck? The wind's so loud. That doesn't seem normal.
No wind over here, just rain.
Lucky you. I need my beauty sleep.
Damn right you do.
What? You mean I look... Shit. I think I heard footsteps on the gravel outside.
Get your crazy dad to check it out.
I'm home alone. The fam are on holiday, remember? I told you this.
Really? Till when? We should hang out.
They really sound like footsteps, but there's something odd about them. I should look out the window, but my bed is so warm.
What if there really is someone there in your garden, looking up at you?
Not funny, David.
Wow, chill. I'm sure it's nothing.
Gonna check. Be right back.
If there's something strange in your neighborhood, who you gonna call?
David! There's someone in the garden.
What? Really?
Yes! I can see a man's back.
What's he doing?
He's looking for something. On his hands and knees in the bushes.
He must be high. Probably looking for his drugs.
David, this is serious. What should I do?
Nothing. He'll probably go away by himself.
Oh my god, now he's digging with his bare hands. He's ruining the garden. Shit, he's turning around.
What does he look like?
David, what the fuck? This isn't funny.
What?
How are you doing that?
What are you talking about?
I can see you. In my garden. How are you writing here without touching your phone? Look up. I'm by the window. Can't you hear me banging on it?
Fuck, Annie, now you're scaring me too. I'm definitely not in your garden. That's not me.
Stop playing around. I can see your face, and you're wearing that stupid football jacket you're so proud of.
It must be someone who looks like me. Honestly, Annie, I'm at home. I wouldn't play around like that.
It has to be a friend of yours, David. Playing a sick prank. How else could he be wearing your jacket?
There are loads of jackets like that. My friends don't look anything like me. You just have me on your mind.
He's ticking again. Fucking leave already!
Annie, do you have a gun in your house?
Don't be stupid, David. I couldn't shoot anyone.
You don't have to use it. Just show that you're carrying.
Doesn't that jacket have your name on the back?
Yeah, the team all got one with their name on.
I can see your fucking name!
What?
What the hell is this, David?
Annie, that jacket's in my closet.
Fuck, he's seen me. Why is he smiling like that? He's coming!
Call the cops! Annie? Annie, pick up! I've called the cops, told them there's a break-in attempt at your place. They said they're on their way, but it'll take about a half an hour. Annie? Are you there?
It's in the house. Can't talk, I have to be quiet. Lights off. I'm in a closet with a knife. Hard to type. Shaking too much.
Fuck. Hang in there, Annie. The police will be there in 20 minutes. Do you know where he is?
It. Not he. The look it had when it saw me, David. No person could look like that.
Jesus Christ! Does it know where you are?
No, I grabbed the knife when I saw it running toward the house, and I got in the closet when I heard it breaking in.
Okay, good. You'll be fine. A druggie doesn't have the brains to find something hiding in the closet. The police will be there soon.
Oh God. It's calling out to me. It doesn't sound like you, David. Its voice is so deep. Filling the house. Filling my head.
What is it saying?
Come out, Annie. I just want to look at you. It keeps repeating that over and over. Have I gone mad, David? Is this what it feels like?
Just 10 more minutes, Annie. Keep it together. You are so strong. You will get through this.
It's coming up the stairs, but so slowly. Irregular steps. Why does it look like you, David? Why you?
I don't know, Annie. Please believe me.
Can you make it stop? Please make it stop.
I would if I could, I promise you.
It's at the end of the hall. David, I didn't say anything to my parents when they left. I was listening to music. Is that the last time I see them?
Annie.
This has something to do with you, David. Only you can make it stop. Think fast.
I don't know, Annie. God, please.
Please.
It might be because I think about you so much. I think about you all the time.
So stop.
I don't know how.
It's scraping something on the walls, getting closer. Please, David.
I'm trying. I'm trying so hard.
It's slowing down. Try harder. Whatever you're doing, it's working. It stopped. I can't hear anything.
Really? Don't go out yet. Stay put until the police get there.
What should I tell them if he's gone?
Everything, Annie. Everything you told me.
I didn't know you felt that way about me, David.
Oh, I'm so glad it stopped.
Can you come over in the morning, David? I really need to see you.
Of course, Annie. I'll be there.
Great. Can't wait.
Annie. Annie? How do I know this is you?
How to Meet a Lover Online by M.N. Malone, performed by Otis Jiry. I met David online. He was a member of a number of interest groups, an avid practitioner of male metrosexual fashion, a kayaking enthusiast, a coin collector, and a racquetball player. He hailed from the Midwest, having a master's in creative writing, and enjoyed visiting the bar scene on the weekends. I could have met David through any one of these many facets of his personality, could have bumped into him among the throng of stalls at a flea market, or in the thumping, neon-lit enclosure of a club. I could have seen him at an amateur poetry reading in the art store on Main Street on a cold Tuesday morning, or caught his gaze in one of the local parks as he readied for a day of paddling and sightseeing in the dead of summer. I could have, but I didn't. No, I met David online, on a board for local gay men. That's when I knew he was the one I'd been looking for. I'm not a young man, not like David. Where he is in his late 20s, I'm nearly 30 years his senior. Where his body seems carefully carved like a brassy statue, limned by an inner glow, mine is creased, sagging, and fragile. He wears a close-cropped beard, full and dark, but I am clean-shaven. His hair is carefully and fashionably attended to, short on the sides, long on the top, a dab of molding wax to seize it at the side, but mine is long, thin, and starched. Never was there such a contrast as us, young and old, beautiful and mundane, but I knew I wanted him all the same. The beauty of such a connection as mine and David's is that, should he have decided to decline my offer of a meeting, it would have hardly broken my heart. We would have simply passed by each other along our own paths, never faded to cross, and we would have faded into each other's histories, little more than footnotes. After all, the web affords a spectrum of anonymity unheard of until its advent, and it is a dial that one is more than able to adjust with each new face upon the screen. It would be a lie to say I wasn't nervous. After all, it was to be my first time with a man, and rejection, anonymous or not, always stings. But I would have continued my search for someone like David, even if it couldn't properly be him. Driven by this, I carefully worded a direct message, and, having guessed his schedule based on his post history, sent it when I thought he might be most active. As luck would have it, there was a reply in my inbox not 15 minutes later, and we began to speak. David and I arranged our meeting for the next week. Some may think I would be cowardly in my approach. After all, I distinguished him before as something of a god, something beautiful, something extraordinary. But for his sake, as well as mine, I was as honest as could be. He knew my age from the first message I sent him. He knew my occupation and my first name. I even sent him a picture, albeit one taken a year or so prior. David knew all that he needed to know to understand, at least foundationally, who I was. Honesty and integrity were core to what I wanted from David, paramount, even. To pretend to be something I am not would be to ruin my own needs altogether. We messaged very little in the week leading up to our meeting. It's not that I didn't want to speak to David. No, I wanted nothing more. But I felt as though I needed to save the conversation. I wanted to hear him speak to me. I wanted to watch the way his lips formed the words, the way his teeth flashed, the way his hands moved to support the gravity of his sentences. I could almost picture it in my head, and when I did, my mind was flooded with that strange mixture of anxiety and happiness that only intimate plans can bring. I often thought of my youth when that happened, of how wrong my father and mother would think it to have relations with a man, how disgusted all of those boys from my school would have been. Indeed, even if I had spent 50 years of my life carefully treading the right side of the line, burying myself between the thighs of women and loving them as best I could. But David had affirmed in me that there was something more than what I'd known and what I'd done. It felt good to cut against the grain that had been instilled in me. It felt freeing, and at my age, one can't put a price on that fleeting sense of being given a choice and choosing wrong. David and I met at Café on Elm. I spotted him from the street, sitting in the patio section. With a wave of his hand, he signaled me, and I approached, taking the iron-backed chair opposite. He wore a gray suit, slightly rumpled, and a purple undershirt that contrasted with the orange glow of his skin as the sun burned into the buildings. The curve of his spine was supple, more effeminate than in the pictures I'd seen. His hands were slender and calloused. It was divine. I ordered a bowl of Turin, David a BLT with a side of French fries, crinkle cut. We each had a glass of Pinot Grigio and talked as we waited for our food to arrive. I told David about my early life, the boarding school, the summer trips to Scotland with my aunt, my mother and father's subsequent divorce. I skimmed over my employment at college as an adjunct nursing professor and my move into the position of office work to get away from the bustle of classrooms. I even covered my brief marriage, a year with a woman named Margaret, who eventually left me to move to California with another man. David smiled when appropriate and at other times offered consolation. He was perfectly attentive. By the time I'd finished, our food had arrived, and David and I had moved our chairs subtly closer to one another. He carefully plucked the toothpick from his sandwich and began to eat. I watched, and then remembered myself and dug in. At one point, David paused, wiped his mouth with the edge of the napkin, and spoke. "So, have you ever been with someone like—" He paused, chewing on his words. "Have you ever been with someone like this before?" I was caught off guard. In all honesty, I hadn't anticipated him asking. Suddenly, the anxiety overrode the happiness. I haven't. This is a first for me as well. If we're being honest, I've always wanted to do this, but I've never felt comfortable. But now, I don't have so much of a reputation to uphold or people to impress. I can do what I want, I think, if that makes sense. David just smiled and nodded. "Well, I'm happy for you, too. If I'm not being too pressing, would you mind another question?" I shook my head no. "Does my age bother you? I mean, I don't want to be rude, but you are a bit older than I am. Does that seem strange at all?" It was my turn to smile. "Absolutely not. In fact, I find it flattering." David beamed. There was a reaffirming warmth to it, a proof that we had reached some level in our relationship already where we could talk man to man about what we wanted, what we needed. I took the chance to urge him to tell me more about himself. He happily agreed. When we had finished our dinner, David and I rose from our seats and walked to our cars. Despite the cool evening settling in, I felt a heat around my neck as we stood on the sidewalk next to his Lexus. He wasn't saying anything, just standing and stroking his chin. I took it as a sign. "David, would you mind? Would you like to come back to my place?" There was silence at first, but then a boyish smile broke across his face. "Absolutely." The heat didn't dissipate, even as I drove. We arrived at my home almost a half hour later. It is by no means big, but it is passably large, artfully decorated, and, above all, sequestered on a small parcel of land at the city limits. I parked my car, and David parked his, and together we made our way into the house. I had saved a bottle of Riesling for the occasion. I turned on the lights, poured a couple of glasses, and moved into the living room with David on my heels. Out of the public eye, he was more affectionate. Light touches on my back and my hip as he moved around me, a twinkle in his eye and a suggestive tone to his words. He took a seat on my couch, the black leather folding underneath his weight with the slightest sound, and I took to the nearest chair. We talked for hours, taking turns elaborating and asking questions. We talked of life again, we talked of goals, but mostly we talked of desires. The more I drank, the more that I began to notice the way he looked at me. Wanting. Hungry. He didn't say it, but in his words there was a question. The question. After I downed my third glass, I moved to his side on the couch. There was hardly a breath before our mouths met. He tasted of apples, his tongue sweet and teasing. I took the lead and pressed my hand to the back of his head. Breaking off, I planted kisses along his cheek, against his ear, and trailed down his jawline. I let my tongue lead when it wanted, and felt his body tense and ease in rising passion. My fingers found the buttons of his suit jacket, then those of his dress shirt beneath. His chest bare, I trailed further down, and I felt his hands run through my hair and urge me forward. I paused along the top of his pants, teething lightly at the edge, and felt him instinctively push his legs wider. My hands fumbled with his belt and then the button hidden beneath. Then carefully I pulled them away. A single glance upward, a meeting of our eyes, reaffirmed his trust. I took him in my mouth. It was soft at first and slow, but the movement of hips urged, pleaded for more. I brought my teeth down harder and harder around the base with each thrust, and he slowed to accommodate. He moaned in ecstasy, his body shaking, and I pushed on. As the skin broke, I felt a rush of blood, and David's body tensed and then eased with it. His hands pushed me down further, shakily. I clenched my teeth tight, severing what remained, and slowly pulled my head away. David was sweating and wincing, but his face said all there was to say about his pleasure. I chewed and swallowed. His body heaved. He raised his thumb and carefully traced the outline of my mouth. As before, I took it in and pressed my teeth down. It was harder than before. The bone crunched beneath my teeth, snapping as I tugged. I tasted salt and copper on my tongue. David moaned, but it was not a painful moan, and I felt the chewy extents of his muscles give way. This I did not eat. This I did not swallow. This I plucked free and saved for later. David did not die, if that's what you're thinking. Not then, at least. We had, of course, prepared for this, and time was of the essence. Cauterization is painful, especially when done correctly. But even through the pain, there was this glow from David. The glow of gratification. I could feel it, too, radiating from myself, burning in my stomach. When he was safe, lotioned and bandaged, I laid my head on his shoulder. David was still panting, and while his face was a mixture of sour pain, he sighed as contentedly as any lover. "Was it good for you?" I nodded. "And you?" "Amazing." David moved in afterward, telling most others that he was leaving the area. No one questioned him. Everyone knew he was the adventurous type. He was still active on his own, and I still continued my work, but when we felt the need to consummate, we did so as we pleased. There came a time, though, when David knew that the end was nearing, and I saw it in the way his body dwindled. His fingers reduced to stubs, his skin marked by the burns that saved his life. There came a day where we sat at the kitchen table and spoke in hushed whispers, despite being entirely alone. He told me he wasn't scared. I told him it would be another adventure. Afterward, he severed the final means of contact he had with the world. I ate David for months. Steak, soups, and all manner of dishes. I prepared him for every meal in some way. With each meal I relived the experience. David was beautiful. David was amazing. David was delicious. David was my first, but he was not my last. In what has nearly been a decade since his death, I have had and seized the opportunity 2 more times. Each time it was gratifying. Each time my partner felt as much ecstasy as I up until the end. But none had ever compared to David. None ever can. I met David online, and we opened each other's worlds to new and expansive horizons. I had never taken another man's life. I never have. But I have been given 3 lives, and I have cherished them all. Which leads me to the reason I'm writing this. I'm a man whose lust has been sated, but who is still incomplete. I am a man who's been frivolous and dangerous, and has thrived because of it. I know now that I can die with no regrets. But can you say the same? I met David online. That's when I knew he was what I had been looking for. My name is Richard, and now you have met me. I want to meet you in person, and we can go from there, piece by piece.
My wife tells me she's cheating on me, about halfway through dinner. I work my way through the potatoes, the beans, and most of the meat before replying. Who? That doesn't matter. It very much does matter, I think. I imagine a 6'4", muscular, chiseled Greek god of a man fucking my wife. I think about the way he holds her. Is he gentle? Rough? And the noises she makes for him. Is she quiet? Does she scream for him? Michael. I'm working on the last of the chicken at this point. Wondering if she's ever fucked both of us in the same day. Michael. Listen to me. I want a divorce. I watch her for a while. Her jaw, the hollow of her neck. Is he better? What? Is he better than me? She purses her lips. I think she's going to tell me that he's just different, that she's sorry it had to be like this, and that she still loves me, really deep down. That it was a mistake, and no one could be better than me. But instead she replies, "Yes, Michael, he's better than you." She tells me that she's staying in the house until she finds a place to rent, whilst we sort this out. I say that maybe I should have the bed, and she tells me that, trust me, you don't. In our bed. Sleep on the couch, Michael. And so that's where I find myself. Working my way through a bottle of expensive scotch I'd saved for a special day, and browsing the internet. My browsing is aimless, filthy, meandering. I lurch from website to website going nowhere. That is, until I see an ad. Your face, your porn. Do you want to live out your most disgusting, most depraved fantasies? Do you want to see yourself do it? Using state-of-the-art deepfake technology, we're able to show you what your deepest desires actually look like. See them played out across the screen. The things you've only spoken of in whispers that you've never even admitted to yourself. Take control of your life. Be the best version of yourself you can be. This is your face, your porn, your reality. I'm in a fuck it sort of mood, more than a little drunk, and I think that this might be the best way to get back at her. I don't even have to leave the comfort of my home, and I can see what I'd look like doing whatever I want. All those things I never told her, the things she'd never do, I can see it. The ad is blank aside from the text on the white screen. That, and a tacky gif of red lips blowing a kiss before running their tongue along their teeth. I watch the mouth on the ad blow kiss after lurid kiss at me, and start to feel convinced. They'll superimpose my face convincingly into any situation, and I'll watch myself carry out my darkest, deepest desires. There are different packages: celebrity, fetish, slice of life, narrative, and on. But one in particular catches my eye. Surprise me. And so, squinting so that I can read the numbers on my credit card, I subscribe. I fill out a quick form, what I'm into, my kinks, my age, name, that sort of thing. It then requires me to take a video of my face from different angles, then makes me cycle through a few basic facial expressions, takes a sample of my voice, saying a few basic sentences. Not long after, I pass out. I awake to a vicious hangover and a notification on my phone. An email containing the first video. YourFaceYourPurchase.mov. It's really me. Or at least, it looks exactly like me. It's night, and fake me seems to be followed by a camera. Fake me spends the evening going into various shops around town and buying tape and an apple from each store. He seems to make the cashiers nervous, and one girl even starts shaking while she tries to find the code for the tape when it won't scan. He is impatient, raps his knuckles on the desks, calls her a bitch under his breath as he leaves. Wide shot. He walks down the street past the glass window. The cashier is crying silently inside. That's it. I try to click forward to see if there's anything else, but that's it. I watched the whole thing expecting it to be the build-up to something, but no. Instead, all I see is something that looks exactly like me drive around town and buy apples and tape. I try to see if I can find the website again to cancel my subscription, but I can't find anything. I try and look through my history, but it's not there. In fact, there's just an empty gap between 1 and 3 a.m. Whilst it isn't porn, the technology behind it is still amazing. The person on the screen looks exactly like me. I don't go to work. I watch TV, drink beer, smoke inside. My wife, and she is still my wife, complains. I don't listen. Around 6 p.m., I receive another email. YourFaceYourGums.mov. The camera is focused on the me that isn't me, sat at a table. He's answering questions. It's my voice. My voice. He says he is sorry. He says he does not know. No, he never knew. He is fiddling with something in his mouth, above his teeth. He has never heard that name before. He says if they insist, but it's not like he'll like it. The voice behind the camera laughs. Close-up of his mouth. There is a thick, black hair protruding from his gum, just above his teeth. And he's trying to wiggle it loose. It isn't working. Until it does, and he pulls out a knot of tangled hairs from the pink of his gum. And they keep coming and coming and coming until there's nearly a foot of hair, and with each tug, it wobbles his front 2 teeth a little. He says this has never happened to him before. The voice behind the camera laughs again. I don't sleep that well that night. Something about the videos has unsettled me. They're too realistic. And watching that fake me fiddle with his gums made my mouth hurt. I say nothing to my wife when she comes in, making no effort to tidy the takeaway boxes from the table. She looks at me for a long, long time as if something is building up inside her. Some thought or opinion about me she's always wanted to tell me. And I watch as it almost bursts out of her lips. And then, nothing. I hear something look through our bins as I try to sleep. A raccoon? Someone homeless? They disappear when I get up to look. The notification wakes me up. Another video. I try to reply to the address that's sending me these, telling them I want them to stop, but the email bounces back. I have no choice but to watch. YourFaceYourTrash.mov. The me that can't possibly be me is eating at a new table. But the whole table is covered in trash, dirt, empty cans, pizza boxes, rotting fruit, bones, tiny crawling things, etc., etc. There are flies buzzing aimlessly about. He is shoveling as much as he can in his mouth. Coffee grounds spill down his chin, and he coughs. He keeps looking to the left of the camera. After swallowing, he winces, pulls something from his mouth. A razor. He has bitten a razor. His blood is dark and thick and mixes with the coffee grounds that dribble down his chin so that it looks lumpy and black. It coats his shirt and his hands as he attempts to wipe his face. He looks to the left of the camera again and continues eating. At this point, I consider deleting my email account. Something is wrong here. There is something in these videos that's beyond unsettling. I don't remember pulling half of those facial expressions, and his reactions are just like mine. It's too real. That's my wince. That's the wince of pain I know I do when I stub my toe or stand on a thumbtack or bite my tongue. But when I get up to fix myself a drink, I find my wife's car gone. And I know that she's with him. With this guy she's fucking. And I feel a stab of self-loathing that goes so deep it pierces my stomach and makes me retch. I watch the video again. Evening comes. YourFaceYourAnger.mov. He's carrying a bunch of grapefruit in his arms in the street. A small, old man bumps into him and the fruit go flying. They make this wet pop as they hit the floor, and in the noise you can hear the fibers that held the fruit together tear. The man is knocked over. The me that looks too much like me sees someone nearby drinking from a thermos, and, grabbing it, empties the scalding water all over the fallen man's face. Close up. The me that shouldn't be me spits on him and winks at the stunned crowd watching. The fallen man moans and spasms. I don't know why, but I sort of like this one. The noise of the fruit is so satisfying, so visceral, and there's something triumphant about the way fake me snatches the boiling water and pours it over the man. Fake me is in control. That evening, my wife tells me that she doesn't think she ever loved me. Not like the way she loves her new man. And that, come to think of it, I'm not much of a man at all. She says this whilst I try and wipe ketchup from my shirt, but only succeed in getting some on the couch. When she goes to bed upstairs, I watch YourFaceYourAnger.mov over and over again. I doze. With my eyes half open, the me that isn't me, the fake me, winks at the camera. My heart gets faster. I pretend to be asleep and keep my eyes open just a sliver. Fake me walks away from the crowd, right up to the camera. Knocks on my screen a few times with his knuckles. It sounds like glass. He watches through the screen, smiling. His eyes are on me, I'm sure of it. He pushes his face against the camera, against my screen, and stares right at me. There is something behind those eyes. Behind that face. Something dark and waiting. He keeps watching me. I think he knows I'm awake. We stay like that until morning. YourFaceYourNeighbor.mov. He knocks on Mrs. Tay's door. He is holding an apple and tape. She invites him in. He enters. The camera follows. In one movement, he stuffs the apple in Mrs. Tay's mouth and forces her to the ground, where he binds her arms and legs with tape. Someone from off-camera hands him a hammer. Wide shot. Mrs. Tay struggles on the floor. The me that watched me looks through her records. Puts one on. It's old and slow, and the vinyl crackles as he drags her into the basement. The video continues for half an hour more, until the vinyl is finished and there is just a loop of a faint crackle. And then there are 2 thuds, a snap, and it ends. I can see someone's car I don't recognize in my driveway. It looks expensive. I go to investigate, but can't find anyone near it. And so I decide to go and check on Mrs. Tay. I stumble down the street in my dressing gown, face covered in patches of stubble, and knock on her door. No one answers. Bill Roberts walks past, and I wave at him. "Seen, Mrs. Tay today, Bill?" He shakes his head. I can tell he's trying not to react to how I look. Trying to be polite. I haven't, seen her in a week or so, Michael. A pause. He's finding the right words, I can tell. "You doing okay? You don't look so good." Never better. The combination of emotions I'm feeling is hard to put into words. I am elated. There is a version of me online who is in control and is acting. I am also terrified. Whatever it is on that screen knows about me, knows something about my life. I don't know if it is here, in this reality, or if it is just peering in. Either option makes my chest tight. I've drunk the house dry and have to make several trips to stock up on liquor. I even call a few old contacts and manage to get some pills, although I promise myself I'll only take them when things get really, really bad. YourFaceYourTrial.mov. The shortest video so far. The me I wish I was me pushes against his jaw, probing. Slowly, surely, he slides his hand under the skin of my face, until I can see the outline of my fingers under the skin, like 5 giant malformed veins. He wriggles the fingers, and the skin comes away from my face. My ring finger emerges from my eyelids. He pulls the hand out, and it is covered in some sort of embryonic fluid. He winks at the camera. At me? I try the same thing that evening after I've shaved, pushing my fingers into my face as if the skin is going to slip and I'll be able to do what he did. But nothing happens. My long nails cut the tender, freshly shaven skin, and I end up just moving my face the conventional way. I smile, then frown, then stick out my tongue, then puff out my cheeks. Once I'm convinced my face still works, I go to bed. I think my wife sneaks him in the back door, her lover, her Casanova. I can hear them fuck, I think. I can't wait for morning. Can't wait for a new .mov. I watch YourFaceYourTrial.mov on repeat to help me sleep. And when he is convinced I'm asleep, he comes right up to the camera again. But this time he fiddles with the edges, as if testing the boundaries. His breathing gets deeper, lustier. He cannot find a way out, so he just watches, cycling through expressions the way I did, convinced that I am asleep. Am I? When I wake up, there is a note from my wife telling me that she's moving in with him for a while. There is a voicemail from work telling me I'm fired, and that there will be no severance pay. YourFaceYourJunkies.mov. finds a couple of junkies on the outside of town. He shows them a huge stack of cash and they both nod. They have about 6 teeth between them and walk with a pronounced stoop, taking him to an abandoned building on the edge of town. He says, "Go in ahead of me, I'll be right in." They pause for a while, trying to work out what the catch is, why this seemingly average guy would offer all this cash up front. But he hands them both small foil packages, and they quickly dash inside. As before, he slowly slips his hand under the skin of his face, working it up and up and up until both hands are completely under the skin. The camera pans down to the rusty gate that borders the property. He hangs something from the gate before walking down the overgrown path into the house. It takes me a while to realize that the thing hanging from the gate is a face. My face. Like a mask, the mouth and eyes are empty, and the skin flaps like a heavy flag in the breeze. There is the sound of cars driving past every few minutes. Then, 2 noises like grapefruit bursting, fibrous and wet and sudden. He walks back down the path and puts the face back on. I do not manage to see what lies under that face, but I desperately want to. I think my hair is falling out. I take a long walk around the block. When I return, I find my wife staring at my laptop as if she's seen the devil. She turns to me slowly. "What the fuck is this, Michael?" The laptop is positioned behind her back, so I can see the screen and her at once. I remember the contents of YourFaceYourJunkies.mov and start to panic. If that fell into the wrong hands, with no context, I can explain. The videos, they're not me. All of the places, the situations, they're fake, I think. She shakes her head. "What situations? Jesus, Michael, it's just hours and hours of footage of you whispering to the camera? It's just your face. What's fake about that?" I can tell she's a little scared. Her disgust at me slowly morphing into something uglier, nastier. She takes a couple of steps back as if seeing me for the first time. Behind her I can see the me that isn't me. The fake me smiling at the camera on the screen. The footage is paused, but he's still moving. Closer and closer to the camera, his eyes wide and with a rigor mortis smile. A smile as if he's just learned how to control the musculature of his face perfectly. And he's holding a finger to his lips. Shh. She takes another step back. I try and warn her, but no words come. Instead, I'm frozen in fear, seeing the fake me grow closer and closer to the camera, to the screen as her back's turned, and he's pushing against the glass of the screen, trying to find a weak point, a crack that will allow him to move from his reality into ours. She can't take it anymore. She turns around and without looking at the screen, she picks my laptop up and smashes it on the floor. "You're sick." She leaves. The thought of the screen smashed for some reason terrifies me. It's as if whatever barrier was between me and that thing is broken. And although I can't see anything, I feel him leaking into our world. Like the soft hiss of gas through a broken pipe or air escaping a valve. I take the laptop to be fixed. Pay extra to make it happen as fast as possible. As soon as the screen is fixed, I take it home, desperate to turn it on, to see if there are any new videos to check on the old ones. I try loading YourFaceYourPurchase.mov. The first video I was sent. A familiar scene plays, except there's no fake me. It's the exact same footage, I'm sure of it, but the me that isn't me isn't there at all. The cashier still weeps, silently, but it's not due to any version of me scaring her. I try loading YourFaceYourAnger.mov. The same. The exact same video, but the fake me isn't there. The man still falls over. Coffee is still poured on his face. The crowd still reacts. But there's no me. YourFaceYourJunkies.mov is now just footage of two junkies walking to a crack house and entering it. They still don't leave, but there is no face on the gate. Nothing. No sign that I was ever there. The house suddenly feels so empty. I can hear the faint tap, tap, tap of the branches against the upstairs window, the gurgling of the drain, the way the old wood creaks ever so slightly with age. I am alone. And I know then that the reason he's not on the screen is because he's here. With me. As I feel sweat start to run down my back, I receive one final email. Your face, your turn. .mov. Wide shot. Me. But the real me this time. Alone. The room is full of trash, rotting food, empty beer bottles, liquor bottles smashed on the floor, pill bottles, crumpled clothes. The real me holds up a hand, waves it. This is live. This is real time. This is happening. Now. The room is dark. Objects are obscured, in shadow. Something moves behind the window. A curtain rustles. Bottles clink. He's in here, somewhere. Watching. Waiting. I am alone with myself. And I have all the time in the world.
Joe reacted to the chime of the incoming email as a mother would to the cry of a child. His fingers danced a complicated flamingo across the keyboard, accompanied by the clacks of the strikes of his fingertips. There was but a single new message, winking at him, from Alan, one of his colleagues down at the department. He sighed. No subject header and a huge attachment to boot. A twitch of his index finger brought the email up. No content either, nothing but a single mysterious file. Nothing recognizable in the file name, just a string of nonsense numbers. Another click would have opened the file. Joe would have. He almost did. Of all the times to trigger one of those banal reminders from IT. His finger was heavy on the mouse button as he drew the translucent ghost of the email from his inbox and held it over the trash icon. He imagined it squirming there like some sort of wriggling bug, but he didn't let go. He'd have to ask Alan about it the next day. He strode confidently through the quiet corridors of the library office. Located in the bowels of the building, this was where old books went to die. Silence wasn't a rigidly enforced rule down here. It was a shroud, coating the place even more thoroughly than the dust. The idea behind the conversion project was simple. Expand access to the university's considerable repository of knowledge. Democratize and digitize it all. It would save the university a bundle when the books were evicted from the premises, shipped off to some off-site storage to molder and rot, their erstwhile homes converted into shiny new offices. There were a few teams on the conversion project, Alan led one of them, working on cataloging, scanning, tagging, and bagging. Alan and his small team were working on some particularly strange texts. A mismatched team, to be sure. Gordon was a department veteran, counting down the days to retirement. With his spindly arms and little potbelly, he reminded Joe of a starving tick. Kimberly was a fresh-faced young lady in her mid-20s, her hair dyed an unnatural pink, the buttons on her clothes holding in rolls of flesh straining at cheap cloth. And Alan, of course. He and Joe had entered the administration at around the same time. A lucky break had given Joe a slight head start in his career above Alan, the smarter of the two, and never afraid to let Joe know it. They'd been friends at the onset, but not so much anymore. Alan's team was working on something particularly dark. One of the older professors had been an avid picker, known to scavenge the many yard sales and antique shops up and down the New England coast. He had a particular morbid focus on the unsavory past of the region, and his collection reflected that. The man was long gone, dead by his own hand. He had been indulging in a little action on the side with one of his teaching assistants, an affair that went sour in a spectacular fashion. The scandal rocked the university at the time, ending with his hand curled around a bottle of pills, the dried vomit crusting on his papers. Digitizing that esoteric collection was both daunting and futile. Joe needed Alan's keen attention to detail, and Alan's career, in Joe's opinion, needed the kind of handbrake that could be afforded by chasing down a pointless project. Alan's strange email had reminded Joe that he had been meaning to check up on the team for some time. Joe rapped on Alan's office door a little harder than he had meant to. The long walk down had given him time to ruminate over the slipping schedule. His armpits chafed against the sodden folds of his shirt, compounding his annoyance at the mocking silence from behind the door. He barged in, the door swinging open to reveal a cramped office, books piled high, concealing much of the darkened room. The light from the corridor ventured hesitantly inwards, reluctant to illuminate more than a small portion. The switch by the door clucked at him irritably, telling him the lights were out. He turned to go, but paused at the sound of something stirring deep in the room. "Alan!" he called. "Joseph." The response was breathy, a sigh almost. Joe felt his anger from a moment ago dissipate, like so much mist before the morning sun. Fear lurked below, uncomfortably perched on his stomach and blocking the back of his throat. He took a step further into the room, careful to stay in the tiny triangle of light. "Hey man, I just came down to check on your team to see if you had any problems with the server." "No problems, we have everything we need." There wasn't just the sound of Alan's voice in the room. The other man was moving about in the dark, and beyond that there was a softer sound, a tiny scratching noise. Writing. The man was writing something. "He sent me something strange last night. I didn't know what to do with it." "You still have it?" Alan's voice boomed, thick with anger. Joe took an involuntary step back. His heel caught the edge of a thick book on the floor, and he steadied himself against the doorframe. "Don't open it. Never look at it." The voice was almost beyond the range of his hearing, soft, far too soft. Joe leaned further in. "Don't look at me. Get out! Get out!" The hidden man's voice rose higher and higher until he was nearly screaming. Joe stumbled back out of the room, stricken by the oral onslaught. Joe was glad then for the silence and light of the corridor. In his haste, he kicked the book that he'd nearly tripped over out of the room. He bent over to pick it up, thinking to nudge it back into the office. He had just picked up the dusty tome and turned around when the door slowly shut itself in front of him. The tumblers fell into place, sealing the door. Joe scooped up the book and fled. What had Alan been working on? He was almost certainly off the deep end. Drugs or worse, thought Joe. He'd have to report this. The thought of petty administrative revenge calmed him. He saw himself filling in a HR complaint by hand. This had to be savored, too personal an experience to leave to the meaningless babbles of a keyboard. Insubordination, poor work performance, neglect of university property to boot. What if Joe had damaged that book on his way out? Alan's fault. All his fault. He settled down at his desk, squirming uncomfortably until he fit his bulk into the cheap office chair the department had provided him. Where to start? Probably with the damage to university property, something concrete that wouldn't require much investigation from HR. He set the book on the table reverently. The cover was plain black leather, cracked and worn with age. No title, no author, nothing on the spine. Joe opened the book gingerly. The first page was blank. Lines appeared on his brow. He flipped a page. Blank. And another. Blank. The book was blank throughout. Joe shut the covers, eliciting a cloud of dust. He sneezed. Strange, he thought. A notebook, perhaps? An empty notebook wasn't about to find its way into the university's collection. He powered up his computer and, upon opening up his emails, discovered nothing new, apart from a reminder from IT to clear his inbox before he overshot his email quota. Odd. He'd always been particular about filing off his emails. He managed to find an email with Alan's latest progress report. Up to now, he'd been impressed with Alan's attention to detail. The man was thorough. He'd cataloged each digital edition obsessively. Physical descriptions, book length, authors. Joe soon realized the folly of his work. He had no information about the book whatsoever. In any case, why on earth would he be looking for a blank notebook in a catalog of books? The episode must have unbalanced him more than he cared to admit. Something had caught his eye, though. The index, the catalog index, on the last book the team had worked on. He checked Alan's other email to be sure. The numbers lined up. Alan had sent him the last digital edition last night. He looked up the details of the catalog. Cover, black leather. Dates to mid-17th century based on the style of language used. Approximately 251 pages long. Author unknown. Title not specified. Something clicked. It had to be the same book. But the book on the table was empty. He picked it up again, looking closely at the pages. Handwritten, they had said. He could see the little indentations left behind, ghost words, as though someone had scrawled on the pages with a pen and no ink. So, a team, working on arguably the most boring task in the world, managed to mess up their work. Alan, waiting somewhere off the deep end, muddling around in the dark of his office. A 300-year-old book, one that had been read and digitized, with nothing more than blank pages. This was turning out to be a bad day. Joe wondered what on earth the team had digitized if the book was empty. He brought up the file from the night before. He glanced at the meta information. 293 pages. Joe messaged his temples with his thumbs. There had to be a mistake. There were more pages in the digital edition than in the empty physical copy. Joe looked up at the text of the book. Except it wasn't the handwritten script of some long-dead hand. Arrayed before him was a mind-numbing array of symbols, odd geometric shapes juxtaposed with curling lines. His tongue dried as he drew shallow breaths through his open mouth. The symbols seemed to dance and writhe before him. He'd never seen this foreign alphabet before, yet they seemed to whisper to him. He couldn't make out what they said, but they hinted at some grotesque shape, amorphous yet many-legged, curling and chittering beyond the range of his sight. It took a supreme act of will for Joe to close the document. He wiped his brow with his sleeve, unsurprised to see a damp spot left by his sweat. The light winked out from behind the screen, leaving nothing but his pale, staring visage, looking back at him in that dull black mirror. He left the empty book next to the screen and left his office for home. It was time to call it a night. Joe opened his eyes. He was sitting, cross-legged on the ground. Kim stood over him, her pudgy fingers locked under his chin. Her small fingernails dug into the flesh of his neck, feeling more like chitinous points than Joe cared to admit. "Joseph, you let her in." Joe couldn't speak. There was a gag in his mouth, and a slippery rope or something similar pulled taut. The air was thick with some metallic tang. Joe tasted the blood in his mouth. The rope was coated in it. Blood. That was the smell. The whole room smelt of it. Gordon found her first, of all the places, trapped in a book. A book. She was practically a god, thousands of years old. Joe's torso ached terribly. Breathing came hard. His lungs struggled, fighting against a tight cage of bone and tendon. His hands were trapped, bound by the same slimy rope that gagged him. Kim leaned in, her pink fringe dangling from her scalp, brushing Joe's eyes. He blinked. Forgotten for years, the old man found her first, but his mind was too weak, too feeble for what she needed. We are different, young, strong, fertile minds. We will add our songs to hers. We nurse her young. We nurse them here. She tapped her skull with her free hand hard enough to produce dull thumps. Joe began to cough and retch, the gag in his mouth smothering him. He clenched his jaws, his teeth sawing at that spongy, cursed thing. "Look at you," she said. Her face, near enough for him to smell her stale breath over the reek of the blood. Her eyes were glazed and unfocused, looking straight through him. She flexed her fingers, the points of her fingernails breaking the skin on his neck, eliciting a snort of pain from Joe. "Weak, unworthy," she snorted, standing up and rubbing her hand on her thigh, as though to scrape away something dirty. He finally managed to spit the gag from his mouth. He felt the rope hit his lap with a dull, wet smack. He looked down at the gaping hole in his torso, the squirming, purplish mass of intestines spilling out onto his lap. He raised his wrists, saw his innards wrapped around them. Before he opened his mouth to scream, he followed the trail of viscera spread across the floor. There in the chaos, amidst heaving loops and whirls, he saw the letters of the book, pulsating with an obscene life as his last meal made its way through the bowels. Joe kicked off the sheets, a sodden, sour-smelling mess. He rubbed at the gummy corners of his eyes with one hand, whilst the other kneaded the ample flesh around his midsection, squeezing it hard enough to hurt. He hadn't seen Kim in over a week. Why the unsettling dream, then? The light streaming through the window told him he had overslept. He was going to be late. He got into his office a little past 10. He settled down into his chair again and arched his back. The pops in his spine gave him no satisfaction. A cup of coffee sat on his desk, the white steam curling above the dark brown fluid. He began his daily ritual, hoping that the smooth flow of routine would soothe his mind. Empty inbox. Nothing except another reminder from IT to clear his emails. Odd. He hadn't received anything since Alan's message. They were being overly enthusiastic again. Still troubled by his dream, he searched for the offending message. The events of the day before must have spooked him enough to bring on that nightmare, dredged out of the depths of his subconscious. He paused, his finger almost clicking the mouse. The file sat there, a smug little paperclip, at the bottom of the email. Joe could almost see the symbols in front of him again, hear that mad chittering at the edge of his hearing. Something was out of place. It took him a while to get it. The email from IT, the inbox, the attachment. The attachment had grown. It was bigger than it was when Alan sent it to him. Impossible. He opened the digital edition again to see what he already knew. The number of pages had increased. The book was growing. He scrolled through the document. The symbols came to life, crawling up the screen like a horde of many-legged insects. The undulating wave gave him a sudden bout of nausea. He got to the end of the book. He didn't have to look closely to find the familiar sequence of loops and whirls from his dream at the end of the book. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. "Could you get me Kim on the line?" He brought his coffee to his lips. There was silence. He lowered the cup. "Did you hear me? I asked you to help me call Kim." "Oh, Mr. Robinson, hasn't anybody told you yet? Miss Eccles passed away. It was in the news yesterday. Someone found her 2 days ago." He hissed as the hot coffee sloshed over the rim, burning his fingers and splashing onto the table. "They don't think she was murdered. Folks on the news said there was a huge mess in the apartment. She'd taken a knife to herself. All the doors and windows were locked from the inside." His assistant was babbling. Joe lowered his scalded finger down to the table, swirling it around in the puddle of coffee without looking. "So nobody got out and in for a few days." She spoke faster and faster, the words rushing out, nearly incoherent. "They say her dog must have been starving, considering what it did to her body. 2 days. She'd been dead 2 days. His assistant was still going on about it, but it was just a wave of noise. Without a word, he set the phone down, gulping down a deep, rattling breath to try and calm himself. He suppressed a shriek upon seeing the twisting symbols rendered in coffee upon his table. Joe gathered up his coat. He was going to speak to Alan again. There was no answer from behind the cheap plywood door. Joe tried the office line and Alan's mobile. Nothing there either. The door still wasn't locked. The scene beyond the door was exactly the same as before. Mountains of books blocked Joe from looking further into the room. As if reluctant to venture deeper, the harsh fluorescent lighting from the hallway struggled to reach beyond the vicinity of the threshold. The light switch still wasn't working. This was a mistake. He turned to leave. "Joe, hey, buddy." Joe froze. There was that same breathy, unearthly quality to Alan's voice. Alan gave a little hiccuping giggle. "Hey, man, come on in. Don't be shy." Joe stepped across the threshold. The room seemed cooler than the corridor outside. "Close the door. It'll be easier for us to talk." "Your lights are out, Al. I can't see a thing." "I see all I need to see. It'll be better for you this way." Last chance. Make a break for the door, Joe thought. Head straight back to the office, burn the book, remove all traces of the digital edition from his computer, and forget that any of this ever happened. The click of the door shutting had a certain finality to it, as though he closed off more than the rest of the hustle and bustle of the university. Maybe he left the last vestiges of normality outside. Only madness remained. "You're doing fine there, buddy. Just take 2 steps forward. Good. Now another 3 steps to your right. Mind the books. We can talk now. Joe swept his hands in front of him. The center of the office had been cleared of furniture. He wandered forward, shuffling his feet across the carpeted floor, a resounding hiss accompanying each and every footfall. His probing fingers met the wall. "Why'd you send me the book, Al?" "Because only you could have done what I wasn't allowed to. That was the point. The person that you are, timid, think you're in control, little man in big shoes. I need to know what the symbols mean. What are they doing to me?" The room fell silent. Joe took a single deep breath and held it till his lungs seemed fit to burst and the blood pounded in his ears. "You read it?" "Yes." "Then it is over. I failed." "What was I supposed to do?" Alan snorted. "Nothing special. Do what she wouldn't let me. Follow your routine. Hide in your little shell, department head. Never open attachments. File them away. Delete her." "Who are you talking about?" "Kim told me about her." "Kim told you nothing. She's the one that was in the book, the one that's living in your computer now." "How can a person live in a book?" "Not a person. Gordon found her first in some musty old tome. She isn't human. She's something else, something worse. You know what I think? I think she's more like a virus. Do you know how viruses work?" "Like germs." "More than that, buddy. We don't know whether they're alive or not, just some DNA in a little package. Pure information, man. Genetic information that gets into a cell and changes your behavior. Makes the cell birth more viruses. That's what I think she is. She's in my head now, in all our heads. That's what they did, found a way to reduce something to its essence, an idea reduced into writing. The book wasn't full when the professor found it. She's changing me. I can hear her. And there's something more. I think she's growing. Pages keep getting added. Even while we were converting it, pages kept filling up." Alan's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. Joe ran his fingers up the wall. They came away wet and gummy. He knew what coated the wall without having to smell his fingers. "What happens in the end?" "I don't know. My journey is already over." Joe groped blindly about the room, using his fingers as a guide against the wall. His foot thumped against something heavy. He kneeled down. "Why the lights, then?" Joe's hand brushed against something slick and clammy. When he found his fingers at the end of it, he jerked his hand back. "The lights are already on, Joe. You see what I see. We're all together in her now. We bleed into each other. I'm done. It's up to you now. I'll see you soon." Joe winced as the world went white. Colors and lines slowly came back into focus. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, in the same twisting, obscene symbols. Some were still dripping. The smell of blood was overwhelming. Along with the symbols came a mad, scrabbling whisper. Something in the letters was alive. A terrible, inhuman intelligence. He put his hands over his ears. It didn't work. The sounds were coming from inside. "She's inside you now," he heard Alan say again. Joe had to look away from the walls. When he saw what was lying on the floor, he had to bite the inside of his cheek to keep from crying out. Alan was sprawled on the floor. Joe couldn't help but stare at the man's lips, hoping to see some signs of life from those purplish flaps. Alan must have been dead for some time. Long gashes crisscrossed his arms, the oldest already scabbing over. Joe knew where Alan had found the blood to write on the walls. "You see what I see, Alan had said. It was dark for Alan, impenetrably dark, because Alan couldn't bear to look at the writhing letters either. Joe knew why he saw nothing, because Alan saw nothing, because Alan lay there, supine and slack-jawed, weeping tears of blood from empty eye sockets, a never-ending scream upon his lifeless face. It was late when the police finished up with Joe. He'd left out all the details about the symbols and the damnable digital edition on his computer. He had other plans for the book. He could feel her there, coiled in the back of his brain. The symbols were starting to crop up everywhere he looked. Closing his eyes didn't help. Even then, he could see them, as if they'd been seared into the back of his eyelids. Could still hear the drone of incomprehensible sounds over the nighttime noise of a busy city. He found his office unlocked. When he entered, he discovered why. The last of her children were waiting for him. Gordon. The small man was in Joe's chair, facing away from the door. The light gleamed off his scalp, visible through his thinning hair. All Joe could see was the top of Gordon's head and his pale forearm on the armrest of the chair, coated with a sheen of fresh blood. Beneath the wash of crimson, darker lines and curves were etched deep into Gordon's skin. Gordon grunted as he spun around to face Joe. Joe's back hit the door as he took an involuntary step back. Every visible inch of the man's skin was covered in lines of bloody script. The stains on his t-shirt and trousers told Joe that the carvings weren't limited to exposed skin. Light glinted off the smile of the straight razor that Gordon was tapping on the armrest. The low whispering started up again. Joe shook his head, trying to clear it. "What are you doing here, Gordon?" The door only opened inwards. Joe would have to step closer to Gordon if he wanted to escape. You been to see Alan? Alan's dead. It's part of her now. None of her children truly die, but he was a bad child, wasn't he? Gordon fixed his beady eyes on Joe. You're going to try to do it, aren't you? Joe stood, transfixed by the rhythmic movement of the razor. The symbols on Gordon's skin seemed to squirm and flow, scurrying up his sleeves and out again like a horde of insects. When Gordon spoke, the crazed whispers rose to a crescendo, buttressing his words. Except, was it really Gordon speaking, or was it her speaking through Gordon? I need her out of my head. I can still do it. I can save us both. The springs in the chair groaned as Gordon pushed himself up. The edge of the razor bobbed and weaved in the air in front of Joe. How little you understand, afraid to be part of something greater than yourself for once. The blade drew near. I had my words to her song. It wasn't enough to use a pen and paper. I tried. Oh, no, not enough at all. This is better. Our flesh sings with her, and you would try to end all of this. It was getting too close. Joe had to make a break for it. A moment's hesitation and all was nearly lost. The little snake of a man saw Joe tense up, and that was all the invitation he needed. He sprang across the room, barreling into Joe. Together they tumbled, a tangle of limbs and snarling curses. Gordon, being the more nimble of the two, quickly got the upper hand. Joe wound up on his back, and Gordon straddled him, drawing wide arcs of pain with the razor as Joe shielded his face with his arms. Foolish, the small man hissed, imagining you understand her glory. Picture her, envision her birthing 1,000 young, not from the weakness of the flesh, diseased, and rotting its way slowly back to the ground. Gordon paused, beads of sweat forming constellations upon his forehead. a thick rope of drool suspended from his jaw. The symbols on his flesh swam and sang. He leaned down, looming over Joe, tapping his temple with the dull side of the razor. "We will bear her children from here. Our minds will be her womb. You see the words now, don't you? You only see what she wants you to see. Soon. Let me help you on your way." Gordon pressed his palm down, pinning Joe's forearms against his chest. The other arm lowered the razor. When the silver edge bit into the thick flesh on Joe's belly, he began to howl and thrash. He bucked like a branded bull. There was one thing Gordon hadn't counted on. Joe must have had 100 pounds on that pot-bellied little monkey. The smaller man wobbled, flailing helplessly before finally pitching over. His skull hit the edge of Joe's desk with a fleshy thunk. Whatever manic strength possessed him obviously did not render him immune to pain. Gordon curled up into a ball, mewling and whining while he clutched his gushing scalp. Joe struggled to his feet. He took a short run up and swung the full weight of his leg into Gordon's midsection. He felt the air rush out of the other man as his foot made solid contact. The voices at the edge of his hearing surged forward, no longer whispers, but rather the deafening screech of an insane choir. He could run, he thought, get out, save himself. But not yet. There was something else to be done. He flicked the razor under a bookshelf with his toe and staggered over to his computer. Do what Alan asked him to do. Make it all stop. Make the pain stop. He punched in his password. His inbox sat before him. He blinked and rubbed at his eyes, leaving a smear of blood across his face. He watched as the letter Q lengthened, sprouted spindly legs, and scuttled across the screen. The soft plastic bulged obscenely with its progress. All around it, letters were melting, the lines of text losing their veneer of familiarity. He was losing it. He squirmed his eyes shut and raked his fingers down the long, deep cuts on his forearm, hoping that the pain would bring him some focus. He squinted, the lines of the screen blurring and swimming. There it was. He moved his fingers in a familiar dance across the keyboard. The screen slowly came back into focus, then human chorus fading back to silence. Had he won? Gordon groaned. No time. He snagged his mobile phone off the table and quickly left his office, dialing for the police as he went. The little man got to his feet. Joe had done a real number on him. He had no idea why she had summoned him there. He didn't know how badly he had been hurt. She had some plan, some greater design. He felt the symbols on his body shift and twist. Sometimes he could almost see her shape, that of a long, sinuous, many-legged horror. He imagined her curled around his brainstem, her needle-like appendages stroking his thoughts like the gentle fingers of a lover. "Come," she said. "Come and see how it begins." He held two scarred forearms against his belly as he stumbled towards the computer. The fat man hadn't won, far from it. He saw his mother sitting there, a simple computer icon, bulbous and pregnant with promise. Before his eyes, he watched the size of the file waver and grow. Bigger. It flowed again. Bigger still. He bared his teeth, whether in a smile or a rictus of pain. He knew not. Never again. Never again to be trapped. My song will be heard everywhere in this age. I have so much to show you all. What could that obese dolt give her that he could not? A university department head was nothing when compared to her glory. But there were things the fat man could do, things that even a devoted son like Gordon could not. Then he saw it, what she wanted all along. Her designed, grand and beautiful. To coax, to shuttle, the silly man down this path. In the distance, sirens wailed, coming closer. A fresh email from IT appeared in Joe's inbox. They were beyond caring about the swelling file on the server. No, they were more interested in why a department head would abuse his access rights to the university-wide mailing list. Gordon was content. He sat back in the chair, running his fingers down the burning text on his arms as he waited for the end.
Chilling tales for dark nights.